Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where every day I try to steer you away from all those negative headlines in tech and talk about how technology is actually changing the world for the better, and also hear more about the inspirational human stories behind those tech companies. I'm excited to get today's guest on the podcast, who is Robin Rosenberg, who is the CEO and founder of Live in Their World, which is helping organisations use virtual reality technology to tackle workplace cultural issues that help employees develop and practice new skills for respectful engagement at work. Now, VR is an immersive technology that many HR executives are starting to embrace to train employees to understand and overcome potential workplace issues, from racism to sexism to hidden systemic biases. Now, especially in the wake of the new Black Lives Matter protests recently, Live in the World hopes to use virtual reality to help people better understand others by putting them in their colleagues' shoes, essentially allowing organisations to use technology to help create a work environment that is more diverse, inclusive and equitable than ever before. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to New York so we can speak with Robin Rosenberg, who's going to tell us all about this fantastic project and the difference that it's making. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Robin. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm a clinical psychologist, and I'm CEO and founder of a company called Live in Their World. It's a New York-based company that uses virtual reality to help address issues of bias and incivility in the workplace and upskill employees for respectful engagement.
It's incredibly cool, the work that you're doing as well. But before we get into that, I've got to ask, where did all this begin and what put you on this path? Can I ask that you share your story with us today?
Absolutely. The short version is that I became interested in hypnosis to help the clients that I had with, move forward in their goals and objectives. And I like to say, before there was virtual reality, there was hypnosis. Have you ever been hypnotized, by the way?
I haven't. No, I would like to be, but I haven't.
Okay, so there's a very cool phenomenon that happens when you're hypnotized, which is that you hold the reality of whatever you're experiencing in trance alongside the reality that your body is, let's say, in my office. So you're kind of holding these two realities. And about 25 years ago, there was a very early academic literature on virtual reality. And I got very excited because VR has that same kind of dual consciousness, if you will, of holding the reality of what you experience in VR alongside the reality of knowing that you're sitting or standing in it and have a headset on. And that's how I got interested in virtual reality. And I followed the academic literature for a long time. And then it kind of exploded, and had the good fortune of collaborating with Jeremy Bailenson, who's the premier American VR psychologist. We were doing some research together around the time that Trayvon Martin was killed in the United States. And then there was a series of murders of African Americans, and some white people saying either white lives matter or all lives matter. And I kept thinking, not that I presume to know the lived experience of being Black in America, but I've written psychology textbooks. I mean, I sort of thought that I knew enough to hypothesize that if we could give people enough of a sense of what the lived experience was of being Black in America, they would understand and really wouldn't say, all lives matter or white lives matter. And that was the idea about using virtual reality to really give people the lived experience and the kind of mental wear and tear of just what each demographic group has and what they experience. So I had this idea. I socialized with a venture capitalist in the Bay Area, Rob Hutter at Learn Capital. He thought it was a really interesting idea. The technology was still, VR was tethered to really expensive computers or in the lab. A few years later, Me Too happened, and Rob contacted me and he said, remember that idea you had? We'd like to fund you to do a proof of concept study on gender. So that's an unusual VC story, but I did that and we got really terrific results. And the participants in our study were really enthusiastic about the experience. And I can talk about that in a bit, but that was it. And then I, really started the company and started working on it full time.
So that brings us up to here in 2020. And VR is an immersive technology that many HR executives are increasingly beginning to embrace to train employees on a myriad of workplace issues, from racism to sexism to hidden systemic biases. But can you walk me through how living in their world works and how it might offer value to other business leaders out there listening today?
Sure. Thanks for asking. What we do is literally put you in the shoes of someone from a given demographic group, right? So we have a bunch in the pipeline, a bunch that are already done. But let's take the perspective of a Black man. So we call that story Javante's story. And you're, for 22 or 25 minutes, you are experiencing a variety of workplace scenes from his perspective, things that happen to him, interaction patterns that he sees, and you're really getting the cumulative mental toll of the ways that small and large incivilities affect him and in a sense, both distract from work, but also create a morale lowering component that we know from research, the ways that incivilities and microaggressions can lead to decreased productivity, decreased engagement, the potential for legal costs for the company, and heartache for everyone concerned. So that's what we do for the virtual reality component. Now, we also know from a lot of research on diversity and inclusion training that what's called one and done or one-off trainings are not effective. Even when they're powerful and they move people, it's short-lived, because really what we're talking about is habit change. So our program uses virtual reality, but not only virtual reality. And what we really want from the science of learning is distributed learning over the course of the year over year in small doses that keeps the new kind of habit training skills top of mind, easy to access, and you're kind of always reminded to implement those skills.
I absolutely love this. I always say at the end of every episode on this podcast that technology works best when it brings people together. And the fact that that's exactly what you're doing here by allowing someone to walk in somebody else's shoes and live in their world for a moment is just invaluable. But do you have any use cases that you could possibly share about how companies today are using immersive technology for diversity and civility training? Because it's so powerful, isn't it?
So it's very powerful. I relate an anecdote, a piece of anecdata, if you will. It's a phrase that I've heard and like. So in one of our VR experiences, it's the white woman track. Her boss comes to look at her computer over her shoulder because, he's looking at his computer, but he still doesn't really understand what she's seeing and talking about. And you probably have not had this experience, Neil, but basically his crotch is in her face.
Oh my God.
Men tend not to do this to other men. They are, they sort of are not as aware for women. And so, when I have seen men in the headset have this part of the track, they often, and women as well, move quite far back. I mean, it's incredibly powerful. And some of the men who have seen this have told me about how amazingly powerful this was, that they no longer do that. They are very, very careful to approach that kind of situation in a very different way. That's not quite what you asked, but I feel incredibly gratified that it was, such a learning experience for them, that it was a one and done. It was a one-off learning experience for that. But people are using VR in the D&I space in different ways. Some of it it's D&I adjacent. So I know that there's just-in-time learning that's a one-off for VR, where if you're a manager and you need to fire someone, they can give you some training in how to do that. Again, it's not clear that what you're learning sticks past that one experience. But I think mostly the power of virtual reality is in conveying deep empathy. So, for instance, we call our VR module emotional learning, as distinct from cognitive learning, which is typical for more e-learning experiences. And we have an e-learning experience. We call it cognitive learning, but it puts you in the place of someone. So there are these super elegant studies that have been done in the philanthropy literature, where they'll give you the exact same content, either in text that you read, in regular video, sort of the traditional kind, and you view on a computer, and VR that you see through a headset. So the content is exactly the same. And it's because it's in the philanthropy literature, it's really about asking you for donations. It's the plight of refugees that you're seeing or reading about or experiencing. And it turns out when you're having the VR experience, you are much more likely to donate afterwards. And when you donate, you're likely to donate in higher amounts than people who saw it in either of the other formats. So virtual reality really is something that it's not the same as imagining unless you know a whole lot about whatever the situation is that VR is portraying. And you're really good at imagining. I mean, that's where it's sort of like hypnosis, where someone would guide you through the experience, but the headset is guiding you through it.
I love how you're increasing people's self-awareness as well, because I'm sure for the most part, a lot of people are blissfully unaware of how they're making someone feel, and I'll probably be horrified when they realize how it could be perceived. But I'm curious, what kind of feedback have you had from your clients around how this tech is helping employees foster a deeper understanding of why colleagues from different demographic groups might experience certain interactions as disrespectful or even uncivil?
So the early feedback we've had has been really, really positive. Again, because we're distributed learning over time, and we just launched in July, the longer term data, we're very excited to see, and we are collecting our own data. It's really important to us that we move the needle. I didn't quit my day job as a clinical psychologist just because I thought this might be, interesting and fun and people would say it was cool. I really want to change the way people engage at work. I'm not interested in being thought police. So, but it's about behavior. That's why I said about habit change. So the early experiences that people have had been really positive, but we want to see over time, year over year, that we are moving the needle. I'm quite confident we will, because we're using the science of learning and sort of building on what's known, but it's always an empirical question. So we're excited to see the long-term results.
And after spending months or maybe even years about debating working from home versus working from the office, it does seem that we're now starting to head towards a more hybrid approach where, depending on the task you've got at hand, you could be in the office or working from home. So what are the biggest challenges in today's remote working world? And do you think VR technology can actually strengthen work relationships, whether they're face-to-face or not?
Remote working in VR is a fascinating topic. So I think, especially in the current moment where people are hungering for live collaboration, and collaboration is really the hardest to do well with work from home. There are VR apps that enable people via avatars to collaborate in real time together where they feel co-located in the headset. And I think that that's a really nice opportunity for people to have that sense of belonging and that excitement, that synergy of collaborating together that I think a lot of people really miss. It's not the same over Slack or over video. There's something about that co-location that adds an element of zing. It's an ephemeral quality. So I think that VR can be really helpful for that, to the extent that some people are in the office and some people are remote, and people who are remote have always been at a disadvantage. VR can help bring them together, because if you're doing the meeting in VR, so no matter where people are, everyone is co-located, it levels the playing field in that sense. It may not be as good for the people in person, but the advantage of VR meetings is it's fully immersive, so people can't also be on their phone or checking their email on their computer. It really is. They are fully there and committed to being there, and that is a wonderful thing, because I think the whole issue about multitasking during a meeting creates problems. Although it means that managers need to get better at deciding who should be in a meeting.
Love that. And I love how you're leveraging technology to solve real world problems and ultimately make the world a better place. I'm curious though, are there any particular tech tools or books that have really helped you on your journey to bring living their world to life?
Interestingly, I think the thing that was most helpful in bringing it to life is my training and experience as a psychologist. Yeah. Clinical psychologist, because it's all been about helping me understand people's perspectives and really immersing myself in their perspective. But beyond that, and then my experience with hypnosis, from a tech perspective, it's probably the work of Jeremy Bailenson, the colleague with whom I collaborated, the American VR psychologist. So he had two books, Infinite Reality and Experience on Demand. They were both sort of summaries of his work, and nice because they were all in one place. And of course, an Oculus headset is the best tech if you don't want to be tethered to an expensive computer. So that's the tech end of it. And then the rest is about the tech.
And I always say as well that none of us are able to achieve success without some help along the way. And as the Steve Jobs quotes go, you can't join up the dots looking forward. You have to look backwards. So is that a particular person who you are grateful for, who helped you get where you are today? I mean, was it your colleague or was it somebody else?
It's actually my husband.
Oh, it's beautiful.
who's my biggest supporter, and who's also a psychologist. It's nice because it's another person to toss ideas with and help expand my thinking. So I just feel really lucky.
Well, I love what you're doing here. And we are living in a world at the moment, which at a time where we need to all come together, there does seem to be more division than ever. But I don't want to end on a bad note. I'd love to end on a much more positive note. So what makes you hopeful or maybe even optimistic about the road ahead?
The amazing collaboration of medical staff and scientists that have happened as COVID was increasing across the world makes me incredibly optimistic about the barriers that have been torn down that are obstacles to collaboration. Whether it's VR, so I know VR is being used by, by geneticists, by, molecular chemists to do 3D imaging real time together in front of molecules. But just the intense collaboration of any kind about best practices will continue as people are really searching for how do we do whatever we're doing better, and getting outside their bubble and really talking and listening to each other makes me incredibly optimistic. because of COVID and work from home, we had to expand the ways that people could have our virtual reality experience. So in addition to an Oculus headset in the office, people who are working from home can either use mobile VR, where they put their phone in a mobile VR headset. You just buy them online, relatively inexpensive, or immersive video, like a YouTube 360 video, where you can move around a bit inside and be much more kind of in the space than traditional video. So we're really excited about the 3 different ways people can have the virtual reality experience.
For anybody listening, wherever they are in the world, if they want to find out some more information about Live in Their World, or even contact your team on how they can work with you guys, what's the best way of doing that?
Our website is liveintheirworld.com, and you can reach me by emailing me at Robin, ROBIN, like the bird or Batman sidekick, Robin at liveintheirworld.com. And happy to answer your questions, hear your thoughts, and engage.
Well, I'll add all those links to the blog post that will accompany this episode. Thank you so much for joining me today. Not just sharing the work that you're doing, but also your story that's taken you from clinical psychology, hypnosis, and then putting it almost into a big melting pot, putting technology in there as well, and then allowing people to walk in someone else's shoes, live in their world, and maybe even change their behaviors a little bit, or just become a little bit more self-aware. It's incredibly powerful and so needed in this crazy world that we find ourselves right now. But more than anything, just thank you for coming on and sharing it with me today.
Thank you for having me and for such wonderful and thoughtful questions. It's an honor.
By immersing employees in realistic digital environments, virtual reality can lead to mind-bending experiences, such as making users feel as if they have swapped bodies with someone else. And the sweet spot here is letting people see firsthand what it feels like to be discriminated against or treated in an uncivil way. And I love Robin's story behind this, coming from a background of clinical psychology, an interest in hypnotherapy and technology and virtual reality. And then out of all of that has come this solution. I think it's a fantastic idea. It's something that I'm going to be following and supporting. I hope to get Robin on next year to find out how that is going. But if anything that we've spoke about today resonates with you, I'd love to hear your experiences and how you're trying to solve the problem by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. There's an open invitation to anybody listening to come on this podcast. So please, send me an email. My website is techblogwriter.co.uk. Whatever it is, I am the easiest guy in the world to find, and I promise you, my door is open to each and every one of you. So keep those messages coming in, and I'll speak to you all again tomorrow. So thanks for listening, and until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.